Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Joining us here, and a very warm welcome. This is the Como UK Mobility Hub Forum, which lots of you have been to before. This is something we run every quarter from Como for all who are interested in mobility hubs across private, public and third sectors. This one has a bit of a different format, and I think a very exciting one, because this is a workshop where we are going to go right into the guts of work we are in the middle of with our partners on the work, WSP, who are going to be presenting and taking us through where we've got to so far. And then we will break out into different rooms and play around with Miro boards that some of you may be familiar with, virtual whiteboards, all part of the vocabulary of 2020 and 2021, isn't it? And we will have a play around with the ingredients, the business models, the considerations for a couple of different types of hubs. So a little bit different in format, but we will, I think, all, I hope, get a lot out of this. It's a mutual learning session. We're really pleased to be able to be doing this. I think we're on a sort of a natural next step of our journey as Como, from the introductory guide we published back in November 19, then the accreditation that we launched at the very end of 2020, and now here we are with this work coming out in spring 2021 on the business and economic models behind hubs, the different operational typologies that we will try to map. This work, I hope, will be of significant help to those trying to do hubs. So in this session, we really want your input. The more you input here, I think the more helpful it will be to everybody, the more we can advance the cause, if you like, of hubs in the UK, which is something that is garnering more and more interest. I'm happy to say each time we do one of these fora, we have more and more people attending. This all feels very positive. So I will hand over now to Pete Ramsey from WSP, who will be taking us through where we've got to so far in the work. And then we will split out into breakout rooms, as I say, and then we'll all come back together at the end. Pete, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. So, as Richard said, I'm Peter Ramsey from WSP. So I've been project managing this thought piece that we're working with Como on, really looking at the business model considerations for mobility hubs. So I'm well aware that many of you will know a lot already about mobility hubs. So very much looking for your input into the process and your ideas about how we run and develop business models for a whole range of different types of mobility hubs. So it was a bit of a presentation from me, then a bit of time at the end of a presentation for comments and discussion, and then we'll go into a Miro session, split out into 4 different groups, and really ask for your support and do some thinking around a couple of different examples of mobility hubs and the type of business models that we could run and some of the funding issues as well. So just to take you through a bit of a background, no doubt many of you know some of this detail already, but so just to go through that agenda. So about 20 minutes of me talking, then hopefully 15 minutes or so of discussion afterwards, then a 40-minute Miro session, and then sort of 10 minutes at the end before we finish at 12, just to get some key thoughts and feedback from yourselves. So in terms of typology, so I'm sure many of you are aware of the guidance that Richard mentioned, and that sets out a range of different typologies that we could apply mobility hubs to. So those large city centre interchange hubs and those transport corridor smaller interchanges. So it's those 2 that we'll be particularly looking at this afternoon or this morning. But there are others as well. So sort of business park and new housing development hubs. So very much focused on specific types of development. Smaller suburban local centre hubs, those more focused on the rural areas, so market towns, village hubs, hamlets, and then specific hubs to support the tourism industry and leisure industry. But in our developing thinking around hubs, then we're now focusing not just on hubs that support purely mobility, but what they do in terms of services and in terms of supporting the local economies and the local communities as well. So we want to start from 2 different directions in terms of hubs. There's mobility starting point, and then there's a service and community and economic starting point, where we can build mobility into particular locations around hubs of activity to provide even greater connectivity and activity and focus for development. But in terms of hubs, we also need to think about not just passengers, but freight as well, how we link those two together to have those more integrated locations for mobility. And just turning to the leadership. So in terms of understanding the business models, we need to start with the leadership and how they develop, how they come about. So hubs can be started from a whole range of different angles. So from the local authorities, focusing on some more traditional locations like bus stations, park and rides, but also looking at the curbside and other uses of public land. Then there's other public sector services, particularly from that service-led hub angle of approach. So hospitals, universities, colleges, sort of medical and health and education focus of hubs, and how we build mobility into those to support people accessing those different activities. Then there's the other sort of more obvious, clear angle of approach. So the existing mobility infrastructure and service operators, so railway stations, privately operated bus stations, car parks, the emergence of EV charging hubs, cycle hubs, and forming from around car club locations as well. We're then looking at the smaller approach, so looking at community facilities and how those can act as hubs in local areas and build mobility into those to support wider connectivity into the surrounding communities. So that may be community centres, shops, pubs, run by parish councils, run by local community interest groups, etc. And then there's the growing private sector interest in mobility hubs, and particularly around the charging hubs, but broader consortia now delivering hubs with a wider range of services. But also in terms of new developments. So residential developments are starting to consider mobility hubs in their development proposals, and in terms of supporting access to industrial business park and industrial distribution locations as well. I mentioned earlier those tourism and leisure sites as well. We then move on to how we develop the hubs in terms of the components that we bring together to form those hubs. So they're formed not just by a building, a site, but by the different services and the functions that you place there. So clearly we often start with mobility services, so car clubs, passenger transport, shared mobility, but also we have the infrastructure to support them, whether that be docking stations, EV charging points, and other bits of infrastructure that you need to deliver those mobility services. But on top of that, as COMO guidance shows, delivering public realm improvements, but also having a wider range of traveller facilities to support information and then interchanging, but also a wider range of commercial functions, whether those be convenience retail, wider retail, freight and logistics, so delivery lockers, logistics hubs. And then we add in, as I mentioned earlier, those community functions as well. So where we can add in sort of community gardens, community halls, community shared space, community cafes, etc., etc. So we bring all those together to in different combinations, applied to different locations and different scales of hubs, and those come together to form the operational requirements, and then in turn help to shape the business models. But beneath those are the operational resources that help to deliver all those different components, whether that be human resources, financial resources, digital connectivity, energy, as well as the land, including curb space, sort of sites, including land, curb space and buildings as well. So we broadly have 6 types of components that we bring together to shape the way hubs will operate, and then the business models flow from those. And in terms of how those components come together, we've come up with 3 types of component, and those can be applied to any of those 6 types of component. So we have fully integrated components which operated as part of the core hub entity, so operating wholly within the operational model of the hub, so using the space, using resources, using the funding, and sharing all the management resources as well. But then we have the partially integrated components as well. So there are components that may share some of those resources, that may share space, may share funding, may share some management, but not fully integrated as part of the hub entity itself. So for example, there may be a car club that uses parking spaces within the hub site, but they're completely financially independent, apart from maybe paying to use that space. And then we have, thinking about a hub as a more spatial entity, we have what we've termed independent components. So those that actually have no relationship to the hub in terms of resources, management, funding, or space. But in terms of the way people use them, use the hubs, they are seen as part of the hub. For example, it might be a retail unit next door to the hub site, or a mobility service operated nearby, so maybe a bus service stopping nearby, or the local railway station, which the hubs is right next to, but they have no specific relationship with them. We also need to think about the temporal dimension and seasonality. So how hubs change over time. So hubs can be there permanently. So components can be there permanently, or they can change by day of the week, by time of day, and in some cases they can change by season. So you may have some tourist locations where components are delivered during the peak tourist season, but they aren't there during the close season. And we've also, part of this commission, we've had some discussion around branded and non-branded hubs. So there seems to be some consensus around having a branded pillar as part of the hub components, but do all the different components then also have to be branded under the same brand as the overall hub? Certainly there's examples from Europe where there are both cases. There are some hubs where the components are all under the same brand. There are other locations where there's a hub brand, but the different service providers keep their own brands as they operate them. So there's still some more thinking to be done around branding and how that fits in with the business model as well. So just talk through that operational model again. So we could, for example, we could have a library that's the anchor of the hub that currently has toilets and community space as some of the components in that site. Those could then be built on with cycle parking, with free Wi-Fi, with co-working space, with placemaking and wayfinding, and that's the core operational hub. So they share the resources, share finance, share space, and share management. But then on top of that, also forming part of the hub are those partially integrated hubs components. So you may have the car club, you may have car parking on the site, you may have an operator of a cafe moving into the library, and you may have delivery lockers, parcel lockers as well. So those share some space and maybe some financial arrangements between them, but they're not part of that core entity. And then we have those independent components. So we've got things like a taxi rank, a passing bus service, a shop next door, doctor's surgery across the road, and maybe a railway station across the road as well. So operating as part of a spatial hub, so they come together and form part of a concentration of activity, but they're not part of the hub itself. They just generate more activity in that area, and people use them in as one entity. So in terms of developing the business models, we've identified three stages to look at. So there's the delivery specification, and looking at it from a local authority point of view, they range from being completely commercial, so where it's free form, where the commercial organisation come in and operate a hub without any interaction with the local authority. And then we go to the other extreme, where the local authority specifies and operates all components of the hub itself. But then there's a variation of those themes between. So there's an approach where a local authority may set a minimum standard for a design manual, for example, where they specify what hubs should look like in their local areas. There's then the next step, going a bit further, where they specify and procure hubs to a specific specification they want to be delivered in their area. And then further again, so they could release franchise opportunities for commercial operators to operate under that kind of model in their area. But again, slightly behind operators so local authorities operating it completely. And then we look at the delivery structure. So that could be through a single operator. So that could be a single commercial operator. It could be a private sector operator, so a public sector operator, local authority, or it could be a third sector. It could be a community group operating by itself. Perhaps more likely is a single operator with operating some components with some also procured and some commercial components as well. So allowing a commercial entity to come in and operate some components within their site. There's the consortium approach, which we're seeing now, where the private sector coming together in consortia to deliver hubs in specific locations, according to which types of component they can bring to play. And then there's a partnership approach. So consortiums at the moment don't necessarily share financial arrangements, they may share sites and management arrangements, but they may not cross-subsidise each other. So the partnership approach is much more deeply involved, where there may be shared risk, shared funding, maybe cross-subsidisation as well. So those 4 different models could be applied to those delivery specifications. And then just beneath there's then those delivery models. There's a purely commercial model delivered by the private sector. There's the procured model, where again the private sector or public sector or the third sector could procure others to deliver services. And then there's directly operated, where the owner of the hub operates for services on the hub site directly. So we bring the specifications, the structures and models together to form different business models for hubs. And we've developed a presentation like this, which uses sliders to show how those could change and what kind of effect they might have on subsidy. So here we've got an in-house operation from a local authority, for example, where it's direct operation. It's a single operator, and they're all operated in-house, so no commercial or procured services or components. So that would more likely have the highest level of subsidy from the public sector. We can then move on to a mixed model, still maybe some direct operation from a local authority, but a single operator plus procurement commercial, so a mixture of commercial, procured and operated. So a less draw on subsidy, so some commercial, some procured, and less need for subsidy. We then have procured consortium, so it's specified by the local authority, delivered by a private sector consortium, but potentially still with a mix of commercial, procured and directly operated components, and again a slight reduction in the subsidy needed. And then that commercial consortium model, where everything is delivered commercially, nothing's procured or operated, and no subsidy from the local authority. And perhaps the other extreme, the direct commercial operation by a single operator, where they do everything commercially. They operate every single component themselves. No procurement, no operation from a local authority, and again, very little subsidy or no subsidy required. So in terms of funding considerations, so something we'd like to discuss with you as part of the workshops. So clearly funding varies from site to site and varies very much depending on the different components that are delivered, and particularly because of the funding drivers and vary from the public sector to private sector to the third sectors. The public sector having quite different outcomes and outputs from the private sector. So very much the funding comes from those different sectors and how they see those outcomes, how they want to deliver those outcomes. First, one thing to really key to mention at the moment is that the commercial sustainability of hubs is unclear across those different sectors, across the different business models. And again, that's something we'd like to discuss with you as part of workshops. What can we do to make some of these funding models much more sustainably funded? In terms of the funding, we also need to think about not just their day-to-day operation, but how they're developed. And clearly that has different impacts on capital and revenue. Often capital is more available, particularly for the public sector. Revenue is a lot more difficult, certainly under the current circumstances. We also need to think about cross-subsidisation. In some instances, some components may be necessary to help deliver some of those outcomes and outputs, but may not be commercially viable. So particularly in those public sector-led services and hubs, can there be cross-subsidisation between more commercially viable and less commercially viable services and components? We also need to think about the temporal nature of funding as well. So how does funding change over time? Is funding available right at the beginning to develop for development and delivery of hubs at the hub sites? And how does that change over a period of operation? Can they be sustainably, financially sustainable in the long term? And really, as a start of 10, we've identified a range of different funding sources for hubs across those different typologies. And again, something we'd like some of your input into as part of a workshop. What are the different funding sources that we could deliver against certain business models? So clearly, there are fares and tariffs and potentially microtransactions from the operation of different hub components and services. There could be rent from service operators for either long or short-term use of space. So the long-term rent, say for a commercial retail space, maybe short-term, so a temporary use of provision of services on an evening or during a weekend, and hubs charge for the short-term access to sites. There's the operation of community and commercial functions. There's service charges, so charging service users to gain access to sites. There's end user charges, so potentially residential developments charging homeowners over a period of time to support new hubs in new housing developments. There's franchise payments, cross-funding from local authority operations, so from parking, low emission zones, etc., etc. Potentially, there's from selling some outputs from the hubs, so selling surplus energy, selling user data. Perhaps on a smaller scale, there's advertising and sponsorship. On a sort of community end, potential for donations or subscriptions for communities, and in-kind resources from volunteering hours. And income from non-hub operations, so local authorities providing financial support to hubs from their other budgets, so from local authority budgets, from funds and grants, from business improvement districts, and other funding sources, including from DFT as well. So we identified a range of funding sources, and those can come together to deliver those business models. And in terms of defining, this was the last slide really, so in terms of defining the business models, reasonable steps we would look to go through. So defining the vision and objectives for hubs. Those then help to define what kind of hub you want to deliver, what type of site, and those help to identify which sites are appropriate, what kind of components you might want to deliver on the sites. Those then lead to the operational model. So how would each individual hub component operate? How do those then come together in terms of an overall operational model? Are they fully integrated, partially integrated, independent? And then what's the funding, roles, responsibilities, resources, and dependencies? And overall, those come together to form the business models. Again, as I showed you earlier, from options from commercial to direct operation, operated, procured, or commercial, and that single operated to partnership approach. So there's a number of steps we look at to step through to identify the overall business model to deliver a sustainable hub. Okay, that's probably enough talking for me. So hand it over to others if they want to add and contribute.
Thank you, Pete, so much for that. We've got a few minutes here, so we can have a general discussion if people want to raise points. But then, of course, we are going to breakout rooms to really get into the guts of this. So anyone wants to come in now for just a few minutes, that's absolutely fine. And then we have about 40 minutes allowed to be in the breakout rooms, and then we will come back together, and so we can mull on what we've found, the key points that have stuck with us. Just to note on recordings, we've been recording the slides here as we go along. We'll record the Miro boards once we're in the rooms with those as well. And then once we come back together, we'll be recording then, so people's contributions then will be recorded. So I will pause here for a moment. Otherwise, we can move straight into the rooms. Okay, I think let's do that then. So it'll split us all up, and we'll all land in the rooms. Speakers, conveners of the rooms will have to get themselves into the rooms, so bear with us for 30 seconds or a minute while we do that, and then we'll be good to go. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody, coming back in. Brilliant. Apologies, the wallpaper is still with us. So thank you so much. I can see some people still ticking back in. We now have 10 minutes until we close, so an opportunity for anyone to raise anything they thought was particularly brilliant or troubling, controversial, etc., from their rooms. We had a great time in ours. Thank you to all my contributors. Thank you to all of you, because I think it certainly moved the thinking on. We were grappling with the network of smaller hubs, and so there were some great ideas on what funding sources to try and loop in, and also on the challenges that some of those are going to face, and on some of the logic assumptions that that are at play here. Do they hold? Do they not? So, chance for anyone to pop things in the chat, or of course pop up on on audio and video and ask questions, post thoughts to us. I'll pause here for a second or two.
I think, Richard, this is Giles, just to say, if it hasn't been said already, the boards will remain open. And I know sometimes internet can crash, as Karen's just said. It's patchy. So one of the advantages, those boards will remain open. You can go back in certainly today and into tomorrow and just add things, especially if you don't hear anything overnight. Sorry, if you come up with any ideas overnight.
Yeah, thank you, Giles. Absolutely. Let us, I will pop into the chat all the board links so you've got them. And of course, you feel free then to dive into another one if you have the time, rather than the one you were in, as there were two different types.
Is it worth also mentioning that we are planning to create a guidance document out of this work as well? There'll be an output.
Yeah. Yes, I'll close up at the end. And this is just if anyone wants to throw in any points that particularly struck them. If not, then I'll indeed move on to what we're doing next. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to edit this stuff in the chat. Louise, your question about visuals, yes. So we'll also pop in the chat. This is an easy way, but to someone's question earlier about the slides coming around, yes, they will. And when we do that, we will send around our introductory guide and accreditation on our hubs map and pages and so on. So you'll have it in that one email, that one place. We do have visualizations of some of this. I think I'm wondering if it's behind your question, the sort of you would find it easier to convince colleagues or other stakeholders if you had visuals to show them. I don't know. That might be unfair.
Yeah, sorry, Richard. It was a point I was going to make. So actually, the work Como has done in terms of the visualization, it's a really effective tool because it takes away having like pages and pages of tables, and the fact is you've got one diagram. So one of the challenges somebody asked me is in terms of the sort of the intellectual property rights over those uses of images, because what I don't want to do is sort of share Como's work for like, oh well, this is what Hertfordshire's doing, and you guys have taken the time and the money to spend on all those graphics. So if we are able to use them, then that's great, but what I didn't want to do is sort of start peddling your work under a Hertfordshire banner. So yeah, that was it for me. Sorry.
The only ask is that credit us, as to where it comes from, which isn't so much a sort of ownership point or that we've spent money on the visuals and so on. Obviously we have, but I think it's more that just we've found with people, it's important to be clear on what's what, and have a couple of conversations with people where they've sort of thought, oh, that's what's definitely proposed for, in your case, Hertfordshire, or for wherever else, so it's, we all stress these are hypotheticals, these are mock-ups, these are ideas, they're not proposals for a particular place.
Richard, it's Louise here.
Hello.
Yeah, the point about the visuals could be for an external audience. I think where I was coming from was actually for the exercise itself. I really loved the fact it was interactive, but I found from an accessibility point of view, I was finding it harder to engage because it was very text-based and not visually based. And I suppose that kind of isolated me a little bit from being able to contribute as much as I wanted to, because I thought I had a lot to contribute, but I wasn't sure quite if I'd got the concepts right of what we were talking about.
Okay, useful feedback, thank you. We will see if on these Miro boards just rested today, we can put maybe a couple of the images we have got in, and certainly bear that in mind for future exercises. I'm sure this isn't the last time we'll be, trying to workshop or work in this sort of way around hubs. Any other points anyone wanted to raise, or that really struck them? Something they didn't know before they started this session. Something that's anything that's tilted in their thinking.
So it's me again. I think one of the points I will take is trying to understand in terms of the delivery. So representing a local authority is all our role is basically putting the capital infrastructure, and that might negate anything else, if you see what I mean. So I think it's, from our point of view, is just understanding where our role is, because ultimately, I don't know, bus stops are managed and delivered by advertising revenue. So would mobility hubs, in essence, would they become that piece of infrastructure? So say Clear Channel are responsible for 7 hubs in your town, and as a local authority we're responsible for 4. So I think it's interesting to sort of understand where others are thinking about those models. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing I'm going to take away from today.
Can I just pick up on that? Just a quick question. Sure. Has anybody had a conversation with Clear Channel or anything around that?
Good question, Morag. Patrick, might bring you in here if I might, just because in our room you gave me a new phrase, the shelter estate, which is the bus shelter network, and so I know that's been part of what you've been working on with and around Crawley. But it's certainly something I've also taken away from this discussion. I think it's interesting for Como to think about.
No problem. I'm happy to help, and it's something we've been working on frustratingly now for 3 years. So, as I say, the initial concept was born as part of the Crawley Growth Programme, which is a LEP-funded regeneration thing. So it's part of a raft of transport improvements, and obviously our interest is in the bus side of it, but we increasingly recognise that a wider selection of sustainable modes are complementary of each other in trying to guide that travel behaviour change that we know our communities need to see to improve air quality and reduce congestion. So it's not going to be easy. We know certainly in our area it will be local government funded, but if we can do anything to support that and help unlock more money, as we have done with the Growth Fund deal, then we're really keen to play our part in doing that.
So can I ask, if you got a concession contract with Clear Channel or something to provide the bus shelters, or did you tender for an operator? Or
no, we're quite keen to stay away from that, to be honest with you. We want great facilities for our customers and great facilities that sell what we do, hopefully very well. But it's Crawley Borough Council that manage the shelter estate, and it's them that have the contracts with Clear Channel, I think it is.
Oh, sorry, are you from Clear Channel? Sorry.
No, I'm from the bus operator. So we provide the connectivity from a transport point of view, but it's the facilities we were really keen to see improved. Yeah. What I would say is that the Clear Channel and the other traditional shelter maintenance providers for local authorities were really disinterested in thinking outside the box on this, unless it came out of a standard Meccano catalogue of off-the-shelf components that they use to throw bus shelters together. They really struggled to get the concept. So
that's my impression as well. And we've got a large rural area as well. So Clear Channel are not remotely interested in having bus shelters in rural areas. I work for a small local authority.
And that's why I think it's so important to challenge that financial aspects of how these things are funded in the future, because we can't have advertising contractors dictating where super hubs or mobility hubs or even shelters go in the future. They need to go where the communities need them, and that means mixing up the funding model.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering whether it would make sense for. I mean, we do need to renew our bus shelter contract. We provide our own bus shelters in the rural areas, and Clear Channel provides the bus shelters under a concession contract in in the more urban areas. But obviously there's this bit, but I'm just wondering if that's the route that we should be looking at, maybe to tender a contract for, not for bus shelters, but actually for wider hub type setups.
Certainly possibility. I mean, we had to encourage the council to threaten to remove these shelters, which are already quite high footfall advertising shelters, from their contract if they didn't play ball. And then eventually we managed to encourage them to start being a little bit more enthusiastic, and only a little, sadly. But the thought of losing a high footfall advertising space tended to focus their attention. So use that in your toolkit if you need to.
May I jump in just to comment on Patrick's, as James here, in terms of if we're looking for a concessionary site where we're going to expect the private sector to come in and take a retail space, or we're looking for a consolidation centre from a kind of first mile, last mile delivery operator, you know, Amazon, for example, there is going to have to be some concession there in terms of the site of these facilities. Surely we can't just say, well, this is best for community, pop it here. We've got to balance that, because otherwise, you know, local authorities can't afford to operate them at all, and something is better than nothing in my brain anyway. So yeah, I think it's a big challenge to satisfy a lot of different masters, you know, whether it's the commercial side of things, whether it's the community side of things, or indeed whether it's from a highways perspective, where we think if we deploy this facility, it's going to give us network capacity release. And also from your perspective as well, you know, is the ridership in this space from a public transport point of view. So, you know, it's a hell of a challenge. I found it super useful today, Como, Richard, all you guys. So thank you for that.
Super. Thank you. Let's draw to a close. People, of course, are having to leave. Thank you all very much. We will follow up with the slides and everything in the one place. Antonio, thank you for popping the right links to our site in the chat here as well. We are, as Antonio said, working towards publishing this out in public domain, like all our work. So we will, in, let's say, spring, but not summer, we will be publishing this and engaging around it. We hope very much it's going to be a useful tool. If you want to talk to us in the meantime outside of this forum, please do. My email is on there. Please don't hesitate to drop me a line. We are always happy to chat. We also have our accreditation process now, which we are going through with a couple of different hubs already, excitingly. And the next forum meeting, as you can see, is on the 22nd of April. Who knows, we might even be out of a lockdown by then. Thank you all very much. Thank you to Giles, Pete, Emily, all the team at WSP for putting in such great thoughts and facilitating this so well. See you on the next one, I hope, if not before.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Cheers, thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.